Hello, everyone. Welcome to the My Healthy Home Summit. Thank you for joining us. I'm your host, Caroline Blazovsky. I'm a national healthy home expert and environmental residential consultant with over 24 years of experience. This summit is designed to educate you about the process of creating a healthy home, to learn how our homes may affect our health and wellness, and the benefits associated with living and working in healthier spaces. We've compiled the most decorated speakers in this arena to help you on your journey. Today, we are joined by Dr. Jack Wolfson, who will be discussing the topic of mold and mycotoxins in regards to creating a healthy home and how they affect our cardiovascular health. Welcome, Dr. Jack Wolfson. Thank you so much for joining us. We are thrilled to have you.
Caroline, it's a pleasure to be on such an important topic and excited to share my information with everyone.
I'm so excited. I've heard so many great things about you, and we've never met before. So, this is exciting for me as well. Can you start by giving just a little quick synopsis about your background and how you got interested in environmental home toxins? How did you even get interested in mold and what's happening in our homes?
Well, I'm a board certified cardiologist, like my father before me. So I'd like to say that I was born into the medical industry. I'm in my mother's womb, and I'm hearing my father have conversations about cardiovascular disease with my mom or, his colleagues. And growing up, I wanted to be just like my father. So I followed in his footsteps. I went through 4 years of medical school, 3 years of internal medicine training, 3 years of cardiology training. Final year, I was the chief cardiology fellow at the hospital in Chicago that I trained at. And then I joined the biggest group in the state of Arizona as a hospital based cardiologist. So everything was going incredible for me. And unfortunately, it wasn't going so well for my father. He was suffering from a Parkinson's like illness called progressive supranuclear palsy. And he finally gets that diagnosis at the Mayo Clinic. And at the Mayo Clinic, they say, we have no idea why he's sick and dying, and we have no treatment for him. Serendipitously and simultaneously, I met this young woman. She's a 29-year-old chiropractor, and she tells me all the reasons why my father is sick and dying. And she said it's the way he eats and the way that he lives, and the environmental toxins and everything that plays into it is why he's sick and dying. So again, Mayo Clinic has no idea, and here's the 29-year-old chiropractor who's got all the reasons. And she said, you have to change yourself and your lifestyle. Otherwise, you're going to suffer the same fate as your father. Well, I didn't want that. And I looked around, me, and I said, well, I don't want that for me. I want better for my patients. And I started to change my medical practice. Eventually, I would leave that big cardiology group and start my own practice, where, again, that methodology that I'll discuss in my presentation is that eat well, live well, think well. And that is the solution to prevent, treat, and reverse certainly cardiovascular disease, if not all disease.
Amazing. And we talk a lot in this summit about people having personal experience. We think that it really is a trigger for people to get into this industry. And we talked a little bit before we got on the summit, but we do have that same passion, and it comes from your own personal experience. And can you touch a little bit about other things that, besides your dad, too, that also encouraged you to get into this industry?
Yeah, well, I guess the next part of the story was I married the 29-year-old chiropractor who is no longer 29, but she's just as amazing and just as beautiful as the day that I met her. So she, together we have 4 children. And unfortunately, in 2018, my wife's health was having a lot of health related issues, a lot of brain fog, a lot of eczema, rashes, gastrointestinal issues, just a lot of kind of like strange oddball complaints. And she was also having difficulty with our third child, who was born at that time. And the third child, her name is Journey, and Journey was having trouble nursing well. And because she didn't nurse well, my wife didn't produce milk well, and so on and so forth. And as my wife was sitting at the kitchen table one day while she's nebulizing glutathione with one hand, and she's trying to pump breast milk to try and stimulate more production for our daughter, she's in the kitchen at the kitchen table, and she looks down on the floor and she sees water streaming out from under the kitchen counter. And at that moment, she realized what the problem was. It clicked for her immediately that there is water damage, there is mold, and she put down the nebulizer, put down the breast pump, grabbed Journey, called me and said, when you pick up our two boys who at the time were in a Montessori school, picked them up, and we're going to stay at my sister's house. Our home is water damaged. I'm never going back in there, and she never went back in there again. And all the materials that were in that home either were disposed of or are in storage. So at that point, we really started to look into, even though we had talked about these various things regarding water damage, mold, and bacterial growth in a water damaged environment, we really didn't give it the gravitas that it really needed and the urgency in dealing with people. And so since then, of course, I've really delved into the literature. I created presentations. I speak on this topic of mold mycotoxins and cardiovascular disease, as that is my specialty. Although you and I can both do a presentation on mold mycotoxins and brain disease, or liver disease, or gut disease, or infertility. Whatever topic and medical issue there is, we can tie it into water damage and mold and/or bacteria.
Fantastic. So, I don't. Let's get to it. Let's get to your presentation. I'm excited to see it, and I know our audience is as well.
One of the things that we talk about at a Natural Heart Doctor is our method here called Eat Well, Live Well, Think Well. And we are the home of the 100-year heart, and you achieve the 100-year heart by eating well, living well, and thinking well. And they're equally as important. Everybody likes to debate the eat well part of the story, and I've got my philosophy on that. But the most important thing I think really there is to make sure you get the chemicals out of your food, eat organic, real food. So hopefully we can all agree on the importance of that. And then we get into live well and thinking well. And inside of living well is avoiding environmental toxins and pollutants, these man-made poisons. And I will blame the men on this one. It is very few women have contributed to the demise like the men have in this particular scenario. But as we get into this eat well, live well, think well, I want to delve into the mycotoxins, the chemical poison bombs released from mold, and also bacteria release their own toxins, endotoxins, and others that would contribute to disease. And I'm going to talk about the cardiovascular connection in this scenario. We already talked about a little bit of my, credibility and stuff like that. Over on the right-hand side is my certificate of board certification from the National Board of Physicians and Surgeons, and so on and so forth. There, this is like the typical scenario that most of what I deal with. You get a woman who comes in, and the woman either comes into the office or we're talking virtually, and she doesn't feel well. She has brain fog. She has fatigue. She's got eczema. She's got diarrhea. She's got a whole slew of complaints, maybe even as severe as MS, multiple sclerosis, these strange neurologic complaints that person has. And here's the man over there. The man is looking at his wife and like, this woman is crazy. The woman I'm married to, she's totally crazy. She's got all these different complaints. Nothing's the matter with her. Here's this doctor who's talking about mold and water damage and all these other toxins that we all discuss, right? Whether it's EMF or metals or VOCs and plastics and so on and so forth. Here's this guy over here. He can't believe what this woman's saying and how much money it's going to cost to remediate or to fix the situation. He feels fine. Of course, he's got things like low libido. He's got erectile dysfunction. He's got low muscle mass. He's got, sleep issues. His blood pressure is a little bit high. He just started a cholesterol drug. He's on his way to have a heart attack, stroke, or cancer. He's got prostate cancer, right? But he feels fine. And that's the woman who's crazy. This is what I typically see. And it's really sad. It's really unfortunate. But I think the more we use information like this to educate people and say, hey, there's data here. There is real information that tells us that this is a serious problem. So I would say that mold, from water damage, bacteria growth from water damage, whether it's a leak in the home, it's a flood in the home, it's a shower, a sink, a toilet. If you have running water, you can be exposed anywhere. Can it lead to a heart attack, stroke, cardiomyopathy, atrial fibrillation, palpitations, sudden cardiac death? All of these cardiovascular diagnoses, the answer is definitively yes. And I'm going to talk about that in a little bit more detail. And just as a reminder, cardiovascular disease remains the #1 killer worldwide. It is responsible for millions of heart attacks, strokes, people suffering with all these conditions are on all these blood pressure drugs, cholesterol drugs. Atrial fibrillation is a very common heart rhythm problem that leads to a lot of different issues, with people. They're scared, they're nervous, they're living in fear. Are they going to have a stroke? What about the pharmaceuticals? Should I have a certain procedure? And then from a financial standpoint, trillions of dollars are spent in the pharmaceutical realm and on these procedures for cholesterol drugs. For example, Lipitor is the #1 selling drug of all time, and it is a worthless and frankly dangerous pharmaceutical like the rest of them. Now, why do people get sick and die? There's a lot of different reasons, but I think ultimately it's because they listen to people like this. They listen to the medical doctors who are just brainwashed into the pharmaceutical and surgical model. It's not that they're unintelligent people. They're very intelligent people. The people that are the head of, Harvard Hospital and Mayo Clinic. They're very intelligent, but they've been brainwashed to think a certain way. And it's very unfortunate because the public listens to these people and they suffer the consequences. And what we're here to is to teach people the truth about the best way to live. One good example of a patient of mine who was under the care of phenomenal doctors, the most prestigious institutions, Mayo Clinic and UCLA. So this is a 64-year-old guy who comes in and he has congestive heart failure, otherwise known as cardiomyopathy, and an inflammatory condition called sarcoidosis. He's, again, 64-year-old male, 25% heart function. He has an implanted pacemaker defibrillator. He's on 8 pharmaceuticals and, of course, feels absolutely lousy and miserable, and hears about me and comes in for a second opinion. Now, sarcoidosis, without getting into this too much, but let's just go to the internet and we pull up on Medscape. Sarcoidosis is a multi-system inflammatory disease of unknown etiology, unknown cause. So it's just a lot of inflammation. It characteristically really affects the lungs, can affect the heart, as in the case of this gentleman here. But again, a multi-system problem of unknown cause. So I see him, I do my whole intake. We go through all the things about how he eats, how he lives, how he thinks. And then we test, don't guess. We use the most advanced testing in the world to look at blood, urine, stool, potentially saliva, whatever modalities we use. And we come up with all these different things that are matter with him. And one thing that pops up is that he is high in mycotoxins. One is from Fusarium and the other is from Stachybotrys, which is also known as black mold. And he is at very high level exposure to this. Now, personally, I'm not the worldwide expert on sarcoidosis, but I consider myself one of the worldwide experts on cause of why people get sick. And we run the test, and this is one of the test results that come back. So as it comes back, then right in front of him, I get onto Google and I do a search. And actually where I go to is PubMed. And I said, sarcoidosis, mold mycotoxins. And what comes up? This. From the journal Environmental Health in 2011, fungal exposure in homes of patients with sarcoidosis, an environmental exposure study. So here we are. This data from 2011. This man lives in a mold contaminated, water damaged home. He sees the doctors at the Mayo Clinic and at UCLA. They've got no clue. He's been there many, many times. Nobody ever mentioned mold. Nobody ever mentioned anything really, except for we don't know what caused this. And I will tell you now that the man is now on one pharmaceutical and their home was able to be successfully remediated. We did testing on the home using the Swiffer test before, and we've done after testing, and the home is at much lower levels. And he was ready to give it all up. He was ready to give up the home, and evacuate. In his situation, we were able to help him out with that, and he's doing absolutely fantastic. Now, everyone likes to talk about all these different toxins, and they're all toxic. They're all bad. Air pollution, BPA, different, paints, flooring, carpeting, all the pesticides, insecticides, herbicides, the list of man-made poisons is into the hundreds of thousands, if not the millions by this point. And they're all problematic. But I think that one thing really stands above and beyond, and that is the mold mycotoxin, the water damage, because mold wants to survive. Mold and bacteria have been around since way before man was here. And it knows how to survive. It wants to survive. It has the deliberate intention of survival. These other environmental toxins that we talk about, whether it's EMF, pesticides, so on and so forth, they are dangerous, no doubt, but they do not have the deliberate intention of killing you. Mold does. Mold wants to survive. It wants to kill off other molds. It wants to kill off other bacteria. It wants to protect itself against insects, anything that it would perceive as harmful to it. So as we think about the things that this water damage is doing and all the things that are related to it, and they're, whether it's allergies that the mold is causing, the mycotoxins and their effects, potentially mold can colonize an immunocompromised person. It can lead to infection in the immunocompromised person. Of course, the VOCs, that musty smell from childhood or from grandma's house. There is no musty smell. The must is mold. It's water damage that gives us that smell. That's all that it is. And here's from 2015, where the VOCs, the volatile organic compounds, the smells that we sense or don't even sense, whatever, and how that leads to sensitivity, symptoms, inflammation, oxidative stress, and ultimately to whatever disease that the medical doctors want to label the person with from these VOCs. But I want to focus more on the mold mycotoxins. And this is a picture of Alexander Fleming. He's in his lab in the 1920s, and he wakes up one day and he goes into his lab and he sees that one of his bacterial colonies is dying. And shortly thereafter, it is determined that there is mold growth in one of his petri dishes, and the mold is releasing a toxin, and that toxin is killing his bacterial colony. So eventually, through the work of others, they would expand on the work of Fleming and then really able to distill out that this was this one particular mycotoxin. And then, of course, they were able to reproduce it and mass produce it. And then that would become the first antibiotic, which is penicillin. So that is the best example of a mycotoxin. Here's another one here called mycophenolic acid. And mycophenolic acid is a phenomenally interesting thing that so many people are exposed to. This is a mycotoxin that is released from several different species of mold. And again, it's called mycophenolic acid. And here's data from 1933, how they discovered it, and they knew that it was an immunosuppressor in 1933, this toxin, mycophenolic acid. So wouldn't you know, Big Pharma understands that this suppresses the immune system. So what do? They put it into a pharmaceutical called CellCept. This is what the medical doctors use if you get an organ transplant, so you don't reject the organ. If you get a new heart, your body wants to get rid of that foreign entity. Well, CellCept is used to suppress the immune system so much that it doesn't attack the heart. And all CellCept is a mold mycotoxin, and cyclosporin is another one. And so you can see on the list of cyclosporin side effects, and a lot of times these are used for autoimmune conditions, but you can look at the adverse effects on here, renal toxicity, liver toxicity, blood cell toxicity. So if it's dangerous in the pharmaceutical form, why would you assume that it's not dangerous when it's inside of your home? I think the water damage really ties in everything. And I will say this again at the presentation, please do not think that you are not exposed, because 90, in my opinion, 90, 95, 99% of homes have water damage. And again, do not assume, I don't care if your house is brand new. If your house is old, you definitely have water damage. But nonetheless, you got to make sure you check, and we'll talk about that. This is 14 ways mold mycotoxins impact the cardiovascular system. And here they are on this infographic. And This is right out of the literature. I put together this data. There probably are more things, but I think 14 is probably a pretty good start on the way that mold damages the human body. And I think the first thing that mold is going to do as we breathe it in, these toxins in through our lungs, but also as we would swallow them down into our gastrointestinal system, the first thing it's going to do is damage the gut microbiome. And of course, also the microbiome inside of our lungs and our epithelial cells in the small sacs called the alveoli, all inside the lung tissue, our sinuses. It's just destroying the gut microbiome because that's what it does. If the mold mycotoxin that produces, that is penicillin, if it's killing off bacteria, what do you think it's doing to the bacteria in your gut? And there are so many studies that talk about this. And we'll talk about a few of these. I'm not going to go through all the different mechanisms for you. Here again, here's data on the gut microbiome. And here's the quote here: exposure to mycotoxins lead to changes in the gut microbiota composition. These changes can lead to disruption of the gut barrier function and bacterial translocation. So what is that a fancy terminology for? That is leaky gut. And when you have leaky gut, this medical diagnosis that the diagnosis that the medical doctors refuse to believe in, here's what's happening: is that things get into your body through the gut lining that don't belong. It's hyperpermeability. Things should get in and things should not get in, stay inside the food tube, and then go out the other end safely. When we have leaky gut or intestinal hyperpermeability, things get into the body that don't belong. The immune system senses that this is a problem, and therefore it goes into attack mode, leads to inflammation and oxidative stress. All medical doctors know that inflammation is bad. All medical doctors know that inflammation leads to all different diseases, again, with all the different labels. This person has abnormal cholesterol. This person had a heart attack. This person has cancer. This person's overweight. This person's underweight, whatever it may be. The medical doctors are really good at those diagnoses, but they're not good at cause. They're not good at finding the cause of why there is inflammation and oxidative stress. Intestinal hyperpermeability. I've got the references on here linked to cardiac disease, hypertension, dyslipidemia. And also here, this is from the Journal of the American College of Cardiology. This is from one of the biggest medical journals in the world and the biggest cardiology journal in the world. So in 2007, if the authors of this study in 2007 know that altered intestinal function is linked to congestive heart failure, this is obviously extremely important. This is in mainstream. This is not fringe medicine. This is out there. The problem is in 2007, I was not ready to receive this information, even if shown it. Neither are all the other cardiologists for a whole variety of reasons. They would look at this article and they would quickly skip over it because of their lack of interest. But we've known about this for a very long time, about leaky gut, intestinal permeability, and what it means to cardiovascular disease. So it's interesting that when we can test people for intestinal hyperpermeability, as often caused by mold and bacterial damage in a home, leading to these off-gassed or out-gassed toxins that we swallow or breathe down, it gets into and causes that leaky gut. And then now the immune system kicks in. Here's a couple examples of that. So we've got antibody production against zonulin, antibody production against actin. Over the last few years, everyone is an immunology expert. Who's got COVID antibodies? Who doesn't have COVID antibodies? Well, this scenario right here is showing you that your immune system is attacking actin. Now, actin is a pretty important protein. In fact, we will die immediately without it. And if our immune system is attacking it, it's not good. So this is for all of you out there that may have fibromyalgia, muscular aches and pains, but it's also for people with gut issues and cardiovascular issues. It's for everybody. Because if your immune system is attacking actin, the protein that is involved in cellular division, how you make new cells, and this protein is also involved in all muscular contraction and relaxation functions. So as your biceps and triceps and quads and glutes all contract and relax, that is all dependent on the protein actin. So, what do you think it means if your immune system is attacking that protein? It's probably not a good thing to do that. And you have these same muscles in your gut, where you propel food to your rear end. And then also, the heart is a muscle. So your immune system is attacking your heart. Your immune system is attacking the smooth muscle inside of your arteries as well. Mycotoxins interfere with actin protein, 2008. So this is not even necessarily the immune attack on the protein. This is actually just gumming up the system. This is where, again, the parts of a car, the pistons of a car, whatever the moving parts are in the car, on how all of those are gummed up and impacted. Here's 4 different studies on mycotoxins leading to leaky gut, leading to intestinal hyperpermeability. 4 studies right there. And understand also that there may not be a lot of data, a lot of research, because there's no money necessarily in this. Pharmaceutical companies lead the research. They research what they want. They look at drugs. Here's a drug you can consider. This is called a mold mycotoxin called citrinin. And citrinin was discovered as a mold mycotoxin to inhibit a particular enzyme. That would become the first statin drug, called lovastatin. That's how the statin industry was born. And trillions of dollars later, this useless pharmaceutical, this dangerous pharmaceutical that originally came from the mold mycotoxin. So if you're living in this toxin, if you are tested for this toxin, what do you think it's doing to your ability of the body to make the things it needs to make inside of this pathway? Now, we know that the statins interrupt this pathway, so does citrinin. And what happens is you don't make things like cholesterol, which is a problem. To not make cholesterol, because we need cholesterol for every cellular function. We make other things like CoQ10 for energy production based on this pathway that gets inhibited by citrinin. Something called dolicol is a steroid-like molecule, natural steroid that is found in the brain, and other things, and even other things we don't even know of yet, that citrinin and, of course, statin drugs inhibit. Now, citrinin, there's a lot of data, of course, on citrinin, on what it does. It inhibits DNA, RNA, leads to oxidative stress, inhibits the production of nitric oxide, which is our body's main vasodilator. It's a cell signaling molecule. And then we talked about the inhibition of dolicol, and this became very important as I learned about this in regards to my father, because my father died of a Parkinson's-like illness that affects the substantia nigra of the brain. So here is data that shows us dolicol is the major lipid component of human substantia nigra. So what I'm trying to say is that if citrinin inhibits the production of dolicol, what does that do to brain and brain function? I've got no doubt that growing up, I lived in a mold, water damaged home. And of course, so did my father. I've got no doubt that he grew up in a home that had water damage. So his entire life, he's around water damage, leading to production of things that it can inhibit dolicol. If we inhibit dolicol, we're going to develop Parkinson-like illnesses. And then on top of that, one would say, well, okay, you're talking about statin drugs. So is there any evidence that statin drugs, Lipitor, Crestor, Zocor, is there any evidence that statin drugs lead to movement disorders like Parkinson's? And the answer is yes. First of all, statins reduce endogenous dolicol levels. Okay. And then here's data on statin and movement disorders. Statins may facilitate Parkinson's, association of statin use with Parkinson's, statins, plasma cholesterol, and risk of Parkinson's, a prospective study. So as we look around society and the explosion of Parkinson's, tremors, different movement disorders, different forms of dementia, PSP, progressive supranuclear palsy, like my father had. And the Mayo Clinic has no idea why my father's sick and dying, yet all of this information is right there. Now, another thing that the mold mycotoxins and potentially bacterial toxins do, and most of the research is on the mold for that matter, not necessarily the bacteria, but it's probably just as bad. And Some homes do not have evidence of obvious mold contamination. It could be bacterial, and oftentimes it's both. Here is from the journal Toxins, Deficient Glutathione and the Pathophysiology of Mycotoxin Related Illness. So, people's levels of glutathione, most of you already know from listening to my presentation and others, that when you have deficient glutathione, you cannot combat these various forms of inflammation, oxidative stress, and these environmental toxins. And what happens ultimately is that these toxins tax the system. They use up your glutathione. So if you don't have glutathione, you can't combat. And the mold mycotoxins decrease the production of glutathione. So here's data from a few years ago, mycotoxins and glutathione, how they lower glutathione, lower the enzymes that make glutathione. They also lower these other antioxidant systems that are very important inside the body called catalase and superoxide dismutase. And superoxide dismutase, abbreviated SOD, is a critically important enzyme that is necessary for combating and balancing oxidative stress, the pro-oxidative forces versus our inherent antioxidant-related forces. Glutathione, of course, is linked to cardiovascular disease. If you have high levels of glutathione, you have a 75% lower risk of cardiovascular diseases like heart attacks and strokes. That is monumental. So wouldn't you want to know your glutathione? Wouldn't you want to improve your levels of glutathione? Wouldn't you want to avoid mold mycotoxins, environmental toxins that deplete the glutathione? The answer is yes. This is a very interesting slide from 2020. Get this. Endogenous deficiency of glutathione is the most likely cause of serious manifestations and death in COVID-19 patients. That's interesting. Right? The talking heads on television, they told us that there was, nothing that could be done. There was nothing else except for to stay apart from each other and 6 feet and social isolation and stay at home and stuff like that. And, wait for pharma to save us. Yet here's an article that says, and that this number one risk factor, glutathione, is the most likely cause. So if I'm trying to protect myself against anything in the world, I want to make sure my glutathione levels are high. And then also, of course, omega-3. People with the highest levels of omega-3 were at the lowest risk of COVID, and people with the highest levels naturally of vitamin D were at the lowest risk of COVID as well. This is interesting as well, how, cholesterol we talk about is such a critically important molecule. Some of these mold mycotoxins look just like it. So these mold mycotoxins will incorporate into cell membranes and all the other places where cholesterol is needed. And that may be as cholesterol forms vitamin D, cholesterol forms our bile salts to aid with our digestion, cholesterol leads to our hormones. So if you substitute the wrong thing into the enzymes that make all these things happen. And the wrong thing in this case, if you're flooded with the mold mycotoxins that look like cholesterol, but they don't give you the same action as cholesterol, it's like putting diesel, fuel into a gasoline tank or vice versa. It's going to fill the tank and it's not going to work. It's going to destroy your car. It's going to destroy your body. This is interesting as well, how the mycotoxins interfere with what's called LDL receptors, and LDL receptors are responsible for clearing out old LDL particles. LDL is important, HDL is important, cholesterol is important, but our body needs to function in a certain way to get rid of the old damaged particles, just kind of a cleansing system. But it's not going to work if you live in mold. Here's evidence: fumonisin B1, a mold mycotoxin, interferes with the LDL receptor. It also interferes with the function of HDL. So lots of data about how it impacts the heart. Mycotoxins increase lipid peroxidation. Again, this oxidative stress. And damaged lipids are highly correlated with cardiovascular disease risk. We want to make sure that we're fixing all that up. Here's data on mycotoxins, again, in inflammation. We talked about oxidative stress. Now we see about inflammation on this particular slide. So I won't go too much in depth into this, but in short, the mycotoxins lead to inflammation. Inflammation is linked to all disease. Inflammation linked to heart attacks. That's why it's so important to get this understanding. And then this is a really fantastic study about how These particular mycotoxins actually led to super high levels of interleukin 12. And what they found is that interleukin 12 was 1,100 times higher in the group of people who were mold exposed. So the massive amount of inflammation created by living in this poison is clearly a problem. Here's data on endothelial function, how blood vessels, how circulation occurs, coronary disease, high blood pressure, blood clots, you name it. And don't forget, all these things, of course, can easily be modified into whatever disease entity we're talking about. Whatever you're suffering from, please understand that one of the likely, if not the biggest offender, is mold. Here's issues with heart rhythm problems, autonomic function. We see a lot of people with POTS, postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome, a lot of young women with this, lightheadedness, dizziness, heart racing feelings, palpitations. We need to check your environment and specifically for mold and bacteria water damage first. This is a cause of heart failure called beriberi. It was attributed to a deficiency of vitamin B1 thiamine. It's most likely mycotoxins that lead to the deficiency of B1 that injures the people. Now, I'll wrap this up real quick. I'm not going to get too much into this, but testing for mold mycotoxins, we say, test all your patients, test yourself. There's multiple different companies who do urinary mold mycotoxin testing. You can do right from the comfort of your own home. You can also check other labs, of course, looking at markers of inflammation, oxidative stress. If you have inflammation, things like HSCRP, C-reactive, protein. If you look at things like sed rate, if you look at things like phospholipase A2, other cardiac markers, if you look at oxidized LDL, lipid peroxides, myeloperoxidase, MPO, and if you have inflammation and oxidative stress, you better figure out why. Or you're going to be in trouble. And then what do you do next? Of course, you can test your home. We love doing the ERMI testing, looking for mold and bacteria in a water damaged home. That's the first test I would recommend to anyone and everyone. I think that there are faulty methods when we use just plates, when we use some kind of air sampling. I think this is the perfect place to start. And the conversation becomes then, once your levels come back high on ERMI or mold, and or bacteria, the conversation is real simple. I need you to find it. And if they can't find it, they can't find the smoking gun, then you may have to move out of your home, depending on how sick you are, depending on how aggressive you want to be about it. But it's a very difficult thing. It's very easy to tell people, hey, eat this food, sleep better, move more, swallow this supplement. This is a big one. It's a big problem. But me personally, we've spent over $300,000 in our lives as it related to mold, remediation and various other things and moving that we've had to go through. So remediation, is it possible or not? If they find the smoking gun, great. If they can't find it, you're still exposed. It's still in your urine. It's still on the ERMI test. And it may be the entire fabric of your home is saturated. And then you're going to have a health, related decision. Do you want to continue to live in the poison, or do you want to get out of the poison? What about all my stuff? I mean, you throw out the high school yearbook, your childhood mementos, pictures of your kids, and all these different things. For us personally, we got rid of a lot of our materials. Other things we put in storage. Maybe someday we'll go in and we'll check these things out in some kind of a hazmat suit. I don't know. Time will tell. But for right now, they're going to sit like most mementos sit in some closet somewhere, unused and unlooked at. Air purifiers, scrubbers, those are going to help temporarily, and they're better than nothing, but they're not getting out of the problem. And again, ultimately, when you are mold sick, whenever you're sick from anything, it all wraps up to eat well, live well, think well. Eat the right foods, avoid the wrong foods, live the right lifestyle, think the right thoughts. And that's going to be your strategy to recover from mold illness. And I want to thank everyone. Thank you, Caroline, for having me on, the entire team. It's been a pleasure to present on this. Clearly, I've learned a lot from my personal experience. I've learned a lot from dealing with thousands of patients. And the concept of water damage in a home or in an office or whatever it may be, it could be in your car, and how that leads to sickness. It really helps to wrap up a lot of the things that we have struggled with over the years as far as why is there so much sickness. And I think at this point in my life, the number one reason there's so much sickness is because they live certainly in an unhealthy home. And one of the biggest, if not the biggest offender in there is water damage, mold, and bacteria. Thank you.
Mm, so many questions. That was fantastic and so well done. I'm going to do a little fast round if you don't mind, because I think it kind of helps us to bring out like things about you and then how we can tie them back to our personal lives. Um, so for our audience, because we have a lot of people who are watching this that have no idea, right? We're very familiar with mold and mycotoxins because of our industry. So I kind of want to just touch on a little bit for clarity so people understand the difference between a mold, a mycotoxin, and how they work, right? So we always think of mold as that fuzzy thing we see growing on a piece of fruit or on a wall, or we see it growing in the refrigerator. How does that differ than the mycotoxin itself? Just a real simple explanation.
Yeah, no, most certainly. So, the mold is that fuzzy thing that's growing on food, and mold contamination of food is clearly a problem. And we learned a lot about the health ramifications because of the mold contaminated grains that are fed to cattle and how the cattle get sick. And that's where we find out the efficacy of binders that help in that arena as well. But the mycotoxins are released from the mold. They are the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, and Marines that are there to protect the mold, that are there to ensure its propagation. So, as one mold notices another mold and how they would have their chemoreceptors and how they signal to one another, well, it's just like this germ warfare, how these things send signals, and these are mycotoxins, of which when we test in the urine for those, we test dozens of those that are known. Hundreds are known to be expressed from mold, but that's what they are. They're the Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marines from the mold and/or the bacteria.
I love that description. And I often tell people too, when we're talking about cleanups and people have basements that they know are moldy, we try to really advise them, don't go down and start disturbing your basement if you have a mold problem, because it's just like you're saying, you disturb it and the mold says, hey, somebody's trying to affect me, it's trying to take me out, and they start releasing more mycotoxin. So these things have been around for, as we talked about, years and years and years and years, and they're super smart, super intelligent, they're able to communicate with each other. And I find it really interesting. We kind of talk about how ants colonize and use all sorts of receptors to be able to communicate. Molds are the same way, and they know when they're being attacked, and they like to send out mycotoxin if they have the ability to do so. Not all molds do, but the ones that do can make us really sick, as you discussed. So I love that. I love that example that you gave about the army because they really are.
Yeah,
Um,
no, I mean they're obviously super smart, but let me say one thing too, on that thing as far as doing it yourself. Yeah, you definitely don't want to. You want to hire professionals, experts in this arena because you can get very quickly intoxicated. And I know you've been in this industry a long time. My knowledge is not as vast and lengthy as yours historically. But we both talked to a lot of people who a lot of their health problems actually started when they discovered mold, when they tried to remediate it
Mediate.
themselves and had that massive exposure, right? And some of those men and women, a lot of times, 4 out of 5 times, it's the women that sense it, and they have a really hard time recovering from it. If I could say one more thing too, but
Yeah.
why are women more affected 4 out of 5 times? Versus the men. Yet we do see a lot of men who are symptomatic from it as well. But I think the women are really they're the detectors. You guys, the women are the like the sensor of a safe environment, because if the female body senses that there's danger in the environment, well, it'd be a bad time to get pregnant, be a bad time to have a baby, it would be a bad time to be fertile. So I think one of the reasons that this man understands is that the woman is that detector of that safety. So why does a man walk into a building, a musty home, a damaged home? They feel fine, but the woman, she from like 20, 30 feet outside of the home,
Immediately
she's
knows, right?
sensing these toxins. They got like that spider sixth sense, which is it on the surface it seems like a curse, but it's a survival
Oh,
mechanism. It's a blessing to have that ability.
So we talked a little bit about mold, and we know it's ever present, right? As we investigate homes, I've done over 30,000 homes in my career. Every home has mold. There's no question. Whether it's around a toilet, whether it's around a shower, whether it's around your sink, whether it's on your dishwasher, refrigerator, you had a leak, it's your roof. I mean, no matter, we know we can find this anywhere. So it becomes a challenge, right? Because we have to be able to sort of figure out one, how much impact is this having into the client? And then it becomes an economic thing. Like, does everyone have the money to go ripping apart their house, or should they? So there's a lot of different philosophies on it. But to in complete agreement with you, 99% of homes, every home I've ever been in, even myself included, right? We have it. So I'm going to just ask you a couple rapid questions. So the first one is, what is your favorite room in your house?
Ooh, the kitchen. I mean, don't. I do like the bedroom. I do love to sleep. I value the importance of sleep. We have four beautiful children that were all born in our bedroom. They were created in our bedroom or one of the bedrooms, and they
Amazing.
were delivered in one of the bedrooms. But yeah, to your point, there is mold everywhere, and I think a lot of people they won't do anything unless they're really suffering. You know, typically people wait till they're in real pain. They develop MS, they develop cancer, they develop heart disease already. Trying to give them proactive strategies is the way to go, but it also can be difficult.
So so the kitchen's your favorite room. What's your favorite activity to do in your home?
My favorite activity to do in the home. Wow, I get we have so many. I don't know. We have a ping pong table, a pool table. Those are my favorite things. Love to cook, love to eat, love to play with my children. Love to be with my wife. All those things.
And what's one thing in your home that you know from an environmental standpoint that you haven't corrected, that needs
Ooh.
correcting?
Honestly, we take this is organic cotton from a company called Wear Packed. My T-shirt is organic cotton from Wear Packed. In case you care, which you don't, my underwear is organic cotton. We take this lifestyle extremely, extremely seriously. So, if there's one thing in my home, I would probably say the fact that we still have Wi Fi in the home, we still have electricity in the home. We do turn off the Wi Fi at night. But that is probably one thing that we would look at. We do test the home, of course, for water damage using the ERMI testing. Again, my wife is quite the detector on that. We've got clean water, no VOC paints, zero carpet in the home. The mattresses are all organic. The furniture came from Cisco Brothers. So we we spend a lot of money on this particular lifestyle, but we feel it's worth it.
And some takeaway that we just blew everybody's mind, right? They're all like, oh my gosh, I just saw this presentation. What is something that someone can do right away that doesn't cost any money and is something they can immediately start doing that's going to make such a big impact in their life, whether it be in a cardiovascular sense with mold or dealing with mold? What would you start doing immediately?
That's a great question. Wow. I mean, and there's so many things that we have people do, but I mean, one thing again is try and switch over. Eat only organic food. Eat only free range grass fed meats, wild seafood. Change that up if you can. Again, just spend more time outdoors. The more time you spend outdoors, the longer you live. And if you're living in water damage, you understand that it can be causing any health condition currently or in the future. A lot of times, right, we ask people, do you feel better when you go on vacation? There's a lot of reasons why people would feel better on vacation. But that being said, do you feel better when you're out of your home? For example, I talked to a woman a few months ago, and she has a history of atrial fibrillation, this abnormal heart rhythm. And all summer long, her and her husband, they got into their RV and they traveled around the West Coast. The day she gets back to her home in Chicago, she goes into atrial fibrillation. She felt perfect all summer long. The day she gets back into her home in Chicago, she develops AFib. I talked to her a few weeks later, still in atrial fibrillation. So that's just the point. You know, try and see, because again, you can go into another place that's contaminated as well, but it could be a different contaminant. Your body reacts differently in those scenarios. And like, I mean, listen, you and I aren't going to sugarcoat this, right? This is not easy. It's not easy to deal with. It's expensive. It ends marriages, relationships, jobs. It leads to so many different mental and physical ailments, but it's the cause, and getting out of it is the answer. So what you do with it, that information is going to be up to you moving forward. But understand that this is the likely single biggest reason why you're sick.
And I think also making people, any little step that you take is profound. So people often get overwhelmed. And so when I'm in a location, they're like, oh, this is wrong and this is wrong. Start. I always start from the bottom up of a house. Houses are built with negative pressure, right? Think of a big arrow. Your airflow comes from the bottom and goes
Mm.
up through the roof and out. So I always start where the most exposure is going to happen. That's typically a basement or a crawl space. So start making these changes immediately. And in complete agreement, I mean, we've seen so many clients who've had these cardiac strange things going on. We've remediated their basements and the symptoms resolve. They don't seem to happen anymore. So can I say, as an environmental residential consultant, that these things are directly related? No, that's not my field of expertise. That's why you're here to talk about, from a medical standpoint, do these things really exist? When we see them happen, is that what we're doing when we're fixing mold and people are getting better? Is that the reason?
Well, what do you think? I mean, I think also back to those things about, what can you do immediately? I think getting rid of the clutter. I was talking to a woman, again, a couple of weeks ago, and right behind her, I mean, her ERMI test came back, it's super high. Clearly, the home has water damage, has all these different things, but she's got this whole library of books. And those books, the paper, not that they were necessarily water damage themselves, but just all this dust, all this stuff that accumulates on that, and just declutter. And then again, we didn't talk about, we talked about it in the presentation, but not, since you asked me about immediate things, yeah, air pure, fresh air, right? Open up all the windows, air purification systems, air scrubbers. Those are going to potentially make you feel better. They're going to buy you a little time until you can get through the remediation process.
And dust is huge. The speaker that just was before you, biggest thing, dust is the devil. And the dust contains all types of things, from mites, from dust mites to mold mites to bacteria. I mean, that becomes a harboring entity. So all of this mold gets harbored in, and then you get all these other microbiologicals that start feeding on the mold, and it becomes a big festering mess. So, like you're saying, cleanliness is next to godliness. Start cleaning and get this stuff out, and have a professional evaluate it first. I mean, that's the first thing to do. Find out how serious it is, have a professional evaluate it, do consultations, work with your doctor, have your consultant work with your doctor. Those are all definites.
Yeah, most
So,
certainly.
where can people find more information about you? And also, where do you think people go to? Obviously, you're a resource, but where else do you find or send people to look for information on this topic if they're interested in researching it more?
Well, let's send them all back to you and your team over there, because I think obviously you guys have fantastic information. The thing is that there are a lot of mold literate doctors out there, and I think this may be a good time to say also what people often get diagnosed with chronic Lyme. Chronic Lyme never sat well with me as far as that diagnosis, and the symptoms of Lyme, what they would say is chronic Lyme, are very similar to the symptoms of mold exposure. And either everything is mold and there is no problem with Lyme, or the mold is such a catastrophe and so inhibitive of the immune system that the immune system can't clear the Lyme spirochete or other co-infections or Epstein-Barr. I think it really helps to, again, encircle everything, that it's, if you are suffering from some of these things, whether it's Lyme, Epstein-Barr, whatever virus we want to talk about, it's because you're immunocompromised from living in mold. But if anybody wants to reach me, my website, naturalheartdoctor.com, is a great place to go. I got an Amazon best-selling book, The Paleo Cardiologist. It's available for free at freeheartbook.com. So those are, a couple places where you can find me. And again, it's a pleasure to be on with you. These topics are so critically important. I was born into a world of pharmaceuticals and procedures, And it made me the person I am today. My father's death made me the person I am today, but their methodologies are wrong. God bless the men and women who work in emergency rooms and trauma centers. But when it comes to causation and helping people prevent, treat, and reverse disease, the medical community has nothing. So appreciate you and your support and everything you and your team are doing. So thank you again.
So informative. Thank you. It was a pleasure, and I am honored, and I appreciate you very much.